So Donald Trump is at it again. He's claiming that the system is rigged, that there's rampant voter fraud, and the media is coming out and they're saying, no, 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 there's no voter fraud, and the politicians say, no, 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 there's no voter fraud, and technically the media and politicians are actually correct on this one. When it comes to voter fraud, there is very, very little of it. The idea of stuffing ballot boxes or the dead voting, predominantly Democrat, isn't very common. There are illegal votes cast. That was found in 2014 that it does happen, but even then, it's not a tremendous number. In close elections, it'll make a difference, but in beyond that, it really won't. But there's more than one way to skin an election cat. It's not just about sitting there and promoting your candidate. It's also about denying votes for the other candidate. And those two things have different strategies. Uh, on one hand, you have the political class sitting there and pushing for overtime for people processing citizenship applications so more people can vote during this election and shut down Trump. And that is occurring. We did receive a notice saying, yeah, we're actually paying people more to process more people through so that they can vote on election day. That's about as ethically correct as sitting there and denying people the right to vote, or sitting there and shutting down the voting application if you felt it would go your way. I think people should be skeptical of that. Another thing that we end up seeing is some stuff that's coming out from Project Veritas videos. The one that was released this week or today or yesterday or whatever shows somebody talking about busing people in. That happens too. In my town, there was a vote for a Walmart, and most of the town was against it. Not a tremendous margin here, but most of the town was against it, and somehow we had unanimous council support. And we found out that people were getting pizza and bus trips into kind of the council meeting to sit there and offer this, and this was being done by the developer who was getting paid. So that stuff happens too. But what I really wanted to talk about is something that's a little bit less discussed, and it's something that the Bernie Sanders fans are really a lot more familiar with. The intentional or unintentional forgetting of ballots or forgetting of registrations, or making it harder for the people who are your ideological opponents to get in. And the Project Veritas video began by sitting there and showing this a couple weeks ago or a week ago, where they had a voter registration group turn around and show that they would, for Democrats, if you voted Democrat, they would show you how to vote by mail or how to send in an early voting form, because it's way, way easier than actually having to show up at the polls, wait in line, and vote. And they wouldn't do that for the Republicans. That's not morally correct, but it's not illegal. And another instance happened earlier this April with the Bernie Sanders fans, and that was, you look at California and all these ballots that came from counties that were predominantly for Bernie Sanders didn't get counted. They just didn't get counted. And that's not, those things aren't directly connected to me. I understand, I'm a libertarian. I voted for Gary Johnson last election. I'm voting for him this election. I voted for Bob Barr in 2008, and I voted for Kerry in 2004. So I have never really had a problem. For my first two elections, I was technically registered Democrat. It wasn't until the last one that I was registered Libertarian, and it really wasn't a big deal aside from waiting in line for an hour and a half. But I have seen the other side, and it does seem to happen a little bit more often to conservatives. In the case of my wife, she has only been able to vote in 2 of the last 3 elections, not because she wasn't eligible to vote in the previous one. She was eligible to vote in 2004. But when this group on campus at Westfield State came around and they started collecting re-registrations for people to vote at Westfield College, so they didn't have to drive the 2-3 hours to go home and vote, and then 2-3 hours back just to vote on a Tuesday and miss out classes and whatnot. Well, they took all these registrations, and my wife was all thought she was all done. She filled it out. She marked that she was intending to vote Republican. And then come time for election day, all of a sudden she's not actually eligible to vote. And it turns out that Masper group had boxes of voter re-registration cards or local voting cards, and those boxes were predominantly filled with votes that were intended to be for Republicans. So somehow the Republican students or the more conservative students, they ended up in a closet, and everybody else got processed. Don't know how that happens. I'm sure there were probably a few Democrats tossed in the mix, because that's always how these scandals unfold. Oh, well, it wasn't all Republicans. It was only like 70, 80%. Um, and that was the first time, I heard that. I thought it was ridiculous. Um, and I kind of like left it at that. But then there was the 2012 election. See, we were both fans of Gary Johnson. It was the first time I'd actually had a candidate where A, I knew what the fuck I was talking about, and B, I actually supported him. And I voted in New Hampshire for Gary Johnson. I'm one of those people. Um, but my wife had to vote in Massachusetts, and she had changed her voter registration from Republican to Libertarian. In Massachusetts, this is denoted not as an I, but an I with a star next to it, right? And so we go into the polling location where she has to go, and there are 7, 10 booths maybe, and 2 things to process the ballots. You mark the little ballot, it gets scanned in. And she goes in, she pulls out her license, she hands it to the individual she's planning on voting, and they find her in the rolls, and they look across and read the line, and there's the I star. And they say, wait a minute, what's this fucking I star? They called over an election supervisor, and they say, well, what does this I star mean? She's on the fucking voter registration thing. Her name's right there. Her address is right there. The license has the name and the address. What is the fucking problem, right? And they say, oh, I don't know. I don't know what that means. We'll have to look it up. It turns out nobody was answering their phone that day. So they said, okay, well, we think that you need another form of ID. So she went out and she got, I can't remember, it was a birth certificate or a passport or something like that. And she brought that, and they said, okay, well, that's good. But you know what? We're going to have you fill out some additional paperwork. You have to fill out the fucking census. And she had to do that in order to vote. It legitimately, there were 3 people in the entire period of time that she was there, and it took her over 45 minutes to be allowed to mark down who she wanted on the ballot. This is something that I was physically there for. I was in the room. I watched this. I was fucking, it was hysterical. You have this person who's on the rolls, who's there, and all they have to do is say, yeah, here you go. And they sent her away to go get more identification. They had her fill out additional paperwork. They made it a massive pain in the ass because she had an I star next to her name instead of a D. And there were a couple people who came in. Of those 3 people, they were all older people. One voted Democrat. She was handed a ballot, and off she went. The 2 Republicans had to put up with a little bit more bullshit. They were in and out in about 15 minutes. So it does happen. There are multiple ways to rig an election. And that's not even discussing the issues of media coverage, which has overwhelmingly been beneficial. I'm not going to say favored, but beneficial to Hillary Clinton. Simply in, covering Trump's tape thing versus not covering her actual government scandal, like what she did when she was in office. Or pretending, oh no, these are hacked, and so this is a problem. So there are multiple ways to rig an election. Yes, technically there is not actual rampant voter fraud, but that is not the only means by which shady shit can occur. If you're going to go out there, understand this. Do understand that this does actually happen to people, and don't pretend that it doesn't.